Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Books Are My Heart. Today, I'm excited to share my interview with prolific romance author, Jennifer Ryan.
Yeah, I can kind of place your books with the tropes a little bit. You know, you get some of the little bad boys, got a couple redeemable playboys in there.
Oh yeah, I love a redeemable playboy. I love it when they're just like, you know what? That's the thing is like, you know, a guy will change for the right woman, and like women are always trying to change a bad boy, and like they usually fall for the girl who's just like, I'm just not having you, you know, I'm just not doing this, and that's the one they actually fall for, and so I love that kind of dynamic.
So I have to admit, like this is why I think you're such a not an anomaly for me, but like I don't really go for the playboys, but yet I read and love your books. So like you somehow, one of my questions for you was gonna be like, how do you write a bad boy without making him a bad guy? Because you seem to have this ability to make them vulnerable and likable while still being like, yeah, I have, you know, quite a list here.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
the
the thing. Because I think they also have a heart, and I think that they get stuck in this like thing. They think they're happy doing all of that, and then they meet the girl who's just like, yeah, this is not really attractive to me, right? Like you're a hot guy, but what you do is not really attractive, and then they have that moment of thought of like, well, wait a second, if I really want her, then. And she's a challenge to them too, right? That's the challenge. I mean, if he can just walk into a bar and pick up a girl, that's fun for a night, but that's not a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And I think guys, you know, I think that's kind of how they think. Like I said, my husband was in the military, and I saw a lot of military guys, and that's what they would do, right? And he was an Army Ranger, so they would deploy a lot and stuff, and they were gone a lot, so everything was kind of not permanent. But when you would like really talk to them, they really wanted something permanent. They didn't know how to do that, and it was like because they hadn't found somebody that they did it for. You know what I mean? So
I kind of love that you were able to include like write what you know in that way. You're kind of able to give them their happily ever afters, even if it's, you know, fictionalized and different humans. You're like, gonna give you hope over here in a fictional way.
that's the whole thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you know, we talk a lot about too, like the heroines and stuff, like, you know, do you write weak heroines? It's like, no, you're not weak if you're at a low point.
Do they ask you if you wrote weak heroines?
Like, people on panels do a lot, like, you know, not if I write weak heroines, but what do you think about, you know, heroines who are weak?
I was gonna say, I just thought like really like offended.
Yeah. But I think some people's perception is that the heroines in romances are weak, and that's usually the generalized question. Like, and so how do you like overcome that, you know, perception? And it's like if you read one of my books, you probably in the beginning of the book never want to be one of my heroines because they're at the lowest point of their life.
I was gonna say some of them have gone through some rough stuff.
Some rough stuff.
Some rough stuff.
That's like the joke at Avon is like nobody wants to be a Jennifer Ryan heroine. They're just like too tortured.
Something is
I
happening
like that they all get their happy ever after, and it's an amazing happy ever after.
But she's earned that.
But she's earned it. But not only has she earned it, but she has the strength and determination and the perseverance to like rise above everything to get it. And that's what I always say, you know, just because somebody is down, maybe depressed, or, you know, at a low point, something terrible has happened to them, everybody has a moment of, you know, I just can't deal with this at the moment, but then they find that inner strength. And for me, that's what I love finding in my characters, is that inner strength that finally comes out and is. And I think people can relate to that. And I've had a lot of people who will email me and be like, you know, I felt just like your character, you know, in certain situations, and to see them like come up, you know, come through it and everything, especially like Jamie and his cowboy heart, she has the PTSD and everything, and Ford is so supportive for her. Like his support enables her to find her inner strength because she wants to be with him, and she knows the only way I can be is if I build myself back up again. So I like to play with those kinds of things, and I come from, I was raised by an alcoholic, and so I know what it's like to have somebody like, you know, really tear you down, and you have to build yourself back up, or, you know, your self-worth has to come from you and not somebody else. And so I try to instill that in the books for all the heroines, and even some of the heroes, you know, like Drake. I mean, he's like at the lowest point possible. I mean, he's just down and out, and it's like, how's he gonna find his strength? Well, he meets a girl who like challenges him, and it's just like, you don't have to be this way.
What you're pointing at is so intriguing and so important to me is the fact that you're taking these characters who are in low points, and then they have the happily ever after. the whole like fluffy read thing. I mean, that's not. I don't buy into that. Like I don't like that when people classify romance like that.
Yeah, I don't think they are light, fluffy reads. I think you have to really like look at the emotion that the and the connection that the author sets up. I mean, it can be a light story. It doesn't have to be dire straits for everybody. You know, they can meet and struggle to be together, but if there isn't that connection, and if you can't show the trust between the two, and that this person knows this person and understands this person, like not just for what they see on the surface, but deeper, and this like, you know, I see you, you know.
I had some romance readers who were saying, I read romance books because they give me an outlet, they give me hope, and so I think it's really great that you're showing characters who've overcome that, because if that's something your reader's dealing with, you're like, hey, this is possible.
Yeah, and so like in Drake's book as well, so it's for the Wild Rose Ranch series, and we have the twins, Juliana and Adria. And so Juliana is kind of like, it's not really like the good twin and the bad twin or anything, but Juliana is struggling with drug addiction because of the way they've been raised and who their mother is, and drug addictions or any kind of addiction can be hereditary as well. And so Adria is like trying to help her sister, and her sister's struggling with this, and you do see Adria like struggle, you know, go to treatment, and, you know, finds a way to like channel her emotions and her memories and her history into a more positive way rather than like self-destructing. And I think that's important, that, you know, even if you find yourself doing something that, you know, is unhealthy for you, or you know is destructive, and you're doing it because you're trying to mask the pain, and I think there's a lot of strength in recognizing that pain and then dealing with that pain and having the, you know, the strength to like look at it and like deal with it. And some people aren't ready at certain points in their lives, but I hope that they do find a time where they can, you know, when I write the books, I do try and think about the readers and like other people's experiences, or when I see something, like the Wild Rose Ranch series, I watched, I was flipping through channels and like was through HBO, and there was a documentary on called Cat House, and it was about a legal brothel. And in my mind, one of the women that they were interviewing, she was very matter of fact, and she's like, look, I'm not doing anything wrong. This is a legal job. You know, I get tested, I follow the law, I'm not, you know, hurting anybody. The people who come here come of their own free will. I stay here of my own free will. And she said, you know, she had 2 children back home. She would fly into the job once a month, stay for, I think, a week or something like that. I think they're only allowed to stay for a certain period of time. And then and her mother would watch the children. She would make more money in that week than she would in 6 months working a, you know, a minimum wage job. And then she would go home and she would be a mother to her children, and stay home with them and take them to school just like any other. And she's like, I make lunch, I take them to school, and this just happens to be my job where I can make enough money to support my children, and I don't see anything wrong with it. And the premise of the Wild Rose Ranch book is that the girls, their mother works in the legal brothel. And my thought was, when I saw her talking like that, I was like, well, what if you were that child and you discovered later in life that this is what your mother does, and it's legal, but it's not like morally acceptable, you know, widely and stuff, and what would your life experience be like? And that's how the girls came to be for me. It's like, you know, those little things that happen in life, or to people.
You were just flipping the channel, and I was like, so if you'd gone one channel above, the series never would have happened.
Yeah, and so I was like, I don't know if my publisher will, like, you know, get what I'm trying to do with these girls, of like, they're trying to establish their own lives, but the minute people find out like who their mothers are and what they do, there's just a stigma attached to them, and how do they like wash away that stigma and have their own life? And when I proposed the series to Avon, I was like, they're not going to take my, you know, my brothel girls is what I called them, and they're not really prostitutes, and surprisingly, my editor came back and she'd gone around and asked all the editors, like, what do you think of this? It's like so unique and like different, but still romances. And everybody was like, this is the series. Because I proposed like 4 different series. And I was like, I just threw this one in. I was like, they're never going to do it, but I'll just put it in there and see what they say. And they loved it. And I think that for the girls, when you read their stories, that it really is, you know, they want to be seen for who they are, not where they came from. And I think that's universal to people, you know. Look at me for who I am, and not like, you know, maybe you have a parent who's in jail or something. That's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Stuff like that. There's all kinds of different scenarios where you can feel that way. So for these girls, it just happens to be that their mothers are prostitutes.
I remember I think when I picked it up, my first thought was she was going to be the one going back and forth doing that or something. But then when I found out it was mothers, I said, oh, this is really, because there have been a lot of those Pretty Woman-esque books.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was so different. It was like a different take on it. You're like, Pretty Woman, like the sequel, but like without the kids doing the job that's driving the story.
Well, it would be as if, Julia Roberts' character, Pretty Woman, has children and they find out later in life that she was a prostitute. She's completely redeemed her life.
Yeah.
And yet, so...
But you're dealing with an emotional conflict, which is so intriguing to me. I mean, again, romance is all emotion-driven, but the fact that that's what the conflict they're trying to overcome or deal with, I mean, that's just so fascinating. And so, it's one of those, speaks to my reader heart over here.
Well, there's that aspect, too, but also in the books, you see the girls interact with their mothers, who are still at the Wild Rose Ranch, and are still working there. And the dynamic between the mother-daughter relationship, which basically makes them who they are, too. But not only that, but then how did those women end up there, right, as well? For Roxy in Dirty Little Secret, her mother, loves her life. She just enjoys, working at the brothel and everything. And for her, it's just like, it's a party every day. And she's just that type of personality. And she sees nothing wrong with it. And she feels no shame about it. And she's just like, if they don't like it, then they're not, I don't need to know those people, kind of a thing. Which I think is empowering in itself for her, but it's very troublesome for Roxy to be like, come on, Mom, can't you be like a normal mom? Which every kid would think, right? Can't you just be a normal mom? Why do you have to be so weird or so different or so flamboyant? And Roxy just can't deal with her mother. And her mother has done some terrible things to her, and so Roxy's, justifiably resentful.
Yeah.
But then in Sonia's book, you meet her mother and her have a completely different kind of relationship. And Sonia's mother has a completely different background in how she's come to the Wild Rose Ranch. She sees the Wild Rose Ranch as protection and safety. Yeah. And so it's so different. And so each of the girls' mothers is different. So I wanted people to be able to sympathize with these women, that they're not there. The way that they got there is maybe not the greatest way, but they see this as it's money, it's security, it's a safe place for them to be if this is if this is where life has led them in the first place. Yeah. And I think that, I think in anything that anybody does, or when you look at somebody, I hope that people in some way, shape, or form can look at other people with a little sympathy instead of judgment all the time,
This is why I love you.
And I do put that in the book too, where other people are judging and you see that, and I think readers recognize that too, oh, I've been around somebody who's just makes a flippant remark without thinking, or says something that they shouldn't say, or really believes something and you have to defend the opposite of it. I think that's just life, and so I try to make the books, I hope it feels for the reader they're a fly on the wall, kind of watching somebody's life unfold before them, and that it feels so real, you do feel you're standing in the room, watching it all play out.
One of my original questions was going to be about your writing process. I mean, how do you create these characters? Do you plot them out? Because when you say you want to have them have these conversations, do you plan to have the conversations, or do they just naturally occur as you're writing?
And naturally, believe it or not, I don't really plot that well. So I normally know who the characters are to start with, the guy and the girl. I try to figure out the guy and the girl.
The guy and the girl.
There's this boy and he meets this girl and they fall in love.
And he's wearing a cowboy hat.
He's always wearing a cowboy hat. But I usually know, the hero and the heroine, I usually know who they are. Naming characters for me is sometimes really difficult. That sometimes can take me a long time to get the name right. I was writing.
Do you have a cheat sheet? Because again, you've written a lot of books.
I've written a lot of books. And to tell you the truth, I actually made a mistake once in the books. I had, in the very first book I wrote, Saved by the Rancher, her lawyer is Ben Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T. Then in book 3, I made the uncle of somebody, George Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, which turns out that actually turns out that he's the hero's biological father, which we didn't know. And everybody has been waiting for Ben's story, the lawyer. And then I realized that they were both knights, and I was like, oh my God, people are going to think they're related. And I didn't realize I had done that, and I'm writing book 3, and so I had to figure out how to make Ben part of the family. And so Ben ended up that Cameron's biological father and Ben's father are brothers. And so now Ben has a cousin he never knew about, and vice versa, because they live in the city, and they actually know each other through the main character from Saved by the Rancher, Jenna. And Jenna is Cameron's boss. It's like a whole big thing. But like it was like a whole circle.
I feel like we need to have one of your fans, or maybe me, all sit down and do like a little chart, like the interway, like web and how
my
it's
husband
connected.
keeps saying that to me because he's like, I sometimes will like say, I think I'm gonna name her this, and then I think to myself, have I used that name before? What? Am I thinking of a character I've already written? I can't remember.
Yeah.
And so I actually at this point, I think I do need to like write them down by names.
I was gonna say, we need to get you an Excel spreadsheet and just be like, first names, last names used. Like, which ones have we done?
That, and I created a flowchart. I was giving a class to a Silicon Valley romance writers group about writing romances and building series. And I actually made a chart because not only do I write in series, I connect all the series in some way. So I did a flow chart that was like, okay, so if you read...
I feel like you do Easter eggs almost.
I do, yeah. And then people are just like, wait. So like in his Cowboy Hart, at the very end of it, you meet Drake McGrath. And he's actually the 3rd book of the Wild Rose Ranch series. In Stone Cold Cowboy, you meet the DEA agents, and they became the Montana Heat series, which includes this book. And
I love that series.
yeah, so like Trigger was in that book, right?
Yes.
Trigger's an undercover DEA agent in Stone Cold Cowboy. And the minute I named him Trigger, I was like, and he's a DEA agent and carries a gun, I was like, he so needs a book of his own. And I knew the fans were going to be like, when will Trigger get his book? Well, of course, he got their books. And so I do connect them all together. As soon as I named him that, I was like, that's it. He's getting a book. I don't know what it's going to be.
How did you come up with Trigger?
Well, because he was a DEA agent, he's undercover, and he's working like within like, you know, kind of like a biker gang, biker bar type of situation, and bikers usually have like weird, you know, monikers that go with them and stuff. So I was like, what would his be? Like, he's kind of a sharpshooter. He's like a really tough guy. He works undercover, so he's got to be like really cool and like, you know, just on his game and everything. And I was like, you know, what if he's like a really good shot and everybody calls him Trigger? And like, that's like, you know, to be undercover, like if you had a name like Trigger, like people would assume that you could like shoot them dead at any second. And I was like, that's him. It's gotta be Trigger. And I just was just like, as soon as it came to me, I was just like, oh, that he's gonna have to have a series, and like his brother's in the book too. And yeah, and he's like, he's been undercover a little bit too long at that point. And so he's kind of like, he's so hardened that you're like, Trigger is just his name, and he's now just identified as Trigger because he's been undercover so long. And I love that dynamic with him as well, of like playing a character for the world that then kind of becomes your true self. And I paired him in his book with a starlet, a movie star who's been kidnapped, who basically her life also is playing a character for other people. So I thought that dynamic was a lot of fun to do as well.
That also gave me like bodyguard vibes type of situation.
There's a whole bodyguard scene in there. I was like, I know readers will probably love this, but he carries her into the hospital like bodyguard style, and I was just like, I set the whole scene up, and I was just like, I was pretty proud of that because I was just like, you know, that's the romance person in me, right? The romantic in me of like, you know, seeing Kevin Costner carry Whitney Houston like bodyguard, and you're just like, he's gonna save her. When I write the books, I usually know what the opening scene is, like what dire straits the character's kind of in. I try to set the reader right in the action, like right in the worst possible moment that they have at that point. And then from there, it's how do they get out of it. And so I just kind of write and see what happens. Sometimes it's a surprise. Sometimes I'm just like, I didn't know that was coming. I was writing a book once, and just recently, which book was it? It's an upcoming book. Mm-hmm. And I was writing and writing and writing, and I was writing this secondary character who's part of the plot and integral. And all of a sudden I was like, he's not helping. He's the bad guy. And I was like, oh my God. He's not really trying to help them at all.
Oh my God.
That's so mean.
I love when the characters surprised you, the
they
creator.
do sometimes, and I was just like, okay, now I like know what's happening
This
here.
is like they took on a whole other life.
It took on a whole other life of its own at that point, and I was like, okay,
That is
I get
amazing.
this now. And then like, let's see, you don't have it here, but Her Renegade Rancher.
That's on my bookcase.
Yeah.
I actually have 2 physical copies because I love you that much.
That book, I literally was writing, and usually once the plot really starts unfolding for me, it's like I just can zoom to the end. But that book, like when it came time to end the book and like disclose all of the secrets and who did what, because she inherits a ranch from this man who just adored her as he passes, and he doesn't want to leave it to his family because they're all money hungry, grubbing, and conniving. And so all of them in some way, shape, or form are trying to sabotage her and make her life miserable. And I was like, so who really is like the bad guy of this book? And I set up one of the people really is the bad guy of it. And I was like, I was writing to the end, I was like, you know, I don't know how to end this. Like, is he really the bad guy? Like, is he really like capable of this? Or is he just frustrated that his father, you know, left him out? And so for like 3 weeks, I didn't even tell my editor, I couldn't write the end. And I was like, I don't know how this book ends. I might have to scrap this whole book, because if I don't know how, if I can't end it, and if it's not going to feel right, or if it's going to feel like, if there's not a payoff for the reader at the end, like, oh, well, we knew all along it was him, I was like, I can't really do that. And so it's finally like, out of the blue one day, hit like 3 weeks, and I was starting to panic, because that never happens to me. I was like really starting to panic, like I might have to scrap this whole book, call my editor and be like, I have to start over from beginning. And then it just dawned on me. I was like, oh, it's not him at all. It's somebody else. I won't give it away.
I was going to say, that's spoiler free.
No spoilers.
Buy the book to find out.
But I was like, now I get it. And so once I got it, I could write the end, and like I had to go back and fix certain things to leave like those little Easter egg kind of things that like maybe you could think like, because I left like everybody was kind of involved, but who was doing the really terrible stuff was the thing. So sometimes, yes, I'm very surprised at like what happens.
That is amazing.
I was writing. Which book was it that I was writing? It's Restless Ranch. I was writing the book, and all of a sudden, he proposes to her, and I was like, wait, what just happened? Why is he proposing to her now? Wait, what are we doing?
You're like, this can't happen yet.
I'm like, wait, did we really just do that? Is he doing that? And I'm like, thinking the story. I'm like, yep, he just did that. We're just gonna go with it. I was like, sometimes I like really just am writing and like deep in it, and it just goes and goes and goes, and then I'm like, and then I'm surprised. I was like, wait, that's not where I was going here, but that's where it ended up.
That is so fascinating. I mean, it's one of those, you really are just in the story. I'm like, are you a vessel for this story, the way this is playing out?
Sometimes I think that, and other times I'm like, in my head, like, find a word, Jen. Just put one word on the page. Pick a word, any word, just put it down, like type something. But other times, if I can if the characters are like really there and the story is kind of flowing, and I can just sit there and type and just let it come, that's I think when I get some of the best stuff. Like every once in a while I'll write a really good sentence, I'm like, oh, that was really good. I kind of live for those moments sometimes, and then there's other times where it's just like it feels like work. Some days it feels like work, and other days I'm like, I'm so excited for these guys. Like, something good is gonna happen today with them.
That's the writing dream. You're going, oh, this is
Well, and I think as a prolific author, you kind of like, I think you teach yourself to like trust where your mind is going with it, right? Like let it kind of happen. I can always fix it, right? If it comes out badly, which I've had to do before. It's like, what? Or write myself into a corner where I'm like, I don't know how this ends.
I mean, one of my questions was, you've written quite a few books. How do you keep it interesting for yourself as a writer and interesting for your readers, like keeping it fresh in regards to not saying the same tropes or same characteristics that, in multiple books?
Well, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier as far as the tropes go. I don't really like pick a trope for the book.
Yeah.
It kind of becomes a trope as I write. I write very organically. I don't put a lot of thought into like, conflict and motivation and stuff like that. I go with what the characters are doing, and I think a lot about, there's questions that I ask myself. Why are they doing this, and how do they feel about it? And I try to put that on the page, because I think in life, that's what your day is, right? You're making decisions. Why do you make that decision? Why do you do the things you do? And then how do you feel about it? Like, if you're doing something fun, then you're happy and, all is good. And if something bad happens, then how do you feel about it? So I'm asking myself those things as I write. As far as the tropes go, that just kind of happens organically. And then keeping it fresh, I try not to repeat plots, it's not, I don't write like, the same plot all the time. Like, they're not all stalkers, they're not all murderers, they're not all, whatever. And I try to take things out of either my real life. I've written a lot about several military people. My husband is ex-military, he's an Army Ranger. My sister-in-law is a lieutenant colonel in the Army. So I know that world a little bit, and so I've written a couple of characters who are that. My husband was sent overseas. He has a Purple Heart. He was shot in combat. So I know a little bit. Yeah, I know a little bit about him coming home with PTSD and being not the person that I remember or recognized, and him trying to struggle with like restarting his life as well. And I've talked to my sister-in-law about, some of her experiences overseas too. And I think that's important to me, to portray the military people and like, and their life and that PTSD. And I've written 2 characters now who have PTSD, and they are very different experiences for both of them, because in real life, everybody suffers in a different way. It's under a same name, but their experiences are completely different, and I think people should know about that. I suffer from anxiety, and I know I have friends who have, told me, oh, I suffer from anxiety too, and people suffer in different ways. Some can have debilitating anxiety, and other people can be like, I just have a hard time getting through my day or focusing, or, I have a hard time, being in crowds or something like that. I think everybody should be validated that, oh, that must be difficult for you. Or how can I help? I always think that you should, if you see somebody who's, struggling, like, how can I help? And be available to them. And then like the DEA series, I did, I think a lot of people know somebody who suffers from addiction or, is touched in it by some way. And so I did the fentanyl epidemic, I did prescription drug epidemic, and I tried to take like different aspects of even, addiction as a whole, and like pick out different ones to show like the different experiences for these characters of how they're interacting with that. And so, sometimes it's just something that'll spark. Third book at the Wild Rose Ranch, Juliana is suffering from addiction. And in the book, as I was writing the book, the news was on, and in a town that's maybe about 30 miles from where I live, they had, it was like 6 or 8 deaths in a 13-hour period because of a bad batch of heroin that was laced with fentanyl. And so I was like, that's really interesting, and that the fentanyl epidemic has become so big. And so I used that, and I did a lot of research on it, and I used that in the book of how something that you can be addicted to, like heroin and fentanyl, can seem like a better, trying to get that next high and everything, but it's like so dangerous. You can overdose without even realizing, without even thinking, and not knowing the concentrations and stuff. so yeah, I just, sometimes it's like something external that'll happen or something that, I've been thinking about for a while. Like, oh, I'd love to write a story about,
I also love how you're getting your inspiration from TV because you got the documentary and every time watching the news. I'm like, it's like a pattern emerging.
I watch a lot of, I'm like a really I'm a TV person. I love.
Favorite TV show?
Right now, my husband and I are binge watching. We just finished binge watching the originals. It's a vampire summer for us. We just finished the originals and we did it backwards by accident. And now we're watching the Vampire Diaries.
That is not what I thought you were going to say.
I know. But that's like how eclectic I am. Like,
Yeah.
I'll watch that and then I'll be like, I'm watching a documentary on,
I was going to say, we do not write paranormal. Like, I have not encountered your vampire cowboy yet.
Yeah, and then I'll watch a documentary about, the crisis for elephants, and it's like, oh, how sad for them. And I like lots of different things. I'm a huge country music fan, so you may not have I don't know. You might know that from some of the books because I'll put a country music
Or you
song
might
on
be
in
able
the
to tell,
truck.
just generally speaking.
And sometimes I'll hear a song because country music is very story-like. And I'll be like, that would be a really cool story. I actually wrote a book. Do you remember Keith Urban did a song called Stupid Boy?
I know all of Keith Urban's songs.
But he did that song Stupid Boy, which is actually written by a woman.
I
And
didn't know
then he
that.
sung it. But it's written by a woman, and she also did the song. But he bought it from her, and he did the song. Anyways, so the Stupid Boy thing. So I actually wrote a book based on kind of like what the story of that is. Like you can do something really stupid and like treat somebody badly, and then of course the hero redeems himself in it. In the book. But so sometimes I'll get inspiration from like a song or even a lyric, or I'll just hear something and be like, oh, that would story. Yeah. And I'll just be like, I think I could do something with that. I have I keep a notebook next to where I write, and sometimes when I'm writing, something will spark too, and I'll be like, oh, it would be cool if this was like a title, or this was like a line in a book. It doesn't fit in this book, but I could do it somewhere else. And so I have like random notes in notebooks. Like if anybody read them, they would be like, she's like psychotic or something. Like this makes no sense together because I just write and go. And then every once in a while I'll go back and read it and be like, oh, I know what that was for, and I know what that was for. All I need is just a reminder.
One of the questions, this is a hard question, but I'm going to ask it. You've written so many books. Do you have a favorite? If so, which one?
I have favorites, but there's always they're favorites for different reasons sometimes. But I wrote a series called the Hunted series, and I wrote the second book is Lucky Like Us, and it's Sam's book, and I don't know what it is about him and Elizabeth but it was Sam in particular that he has just stuck with me. And every once in a while in my head, I'm like, I wonder what Sam's doing now. Like, what would he be doing now? Aww. He and Elizabeth are married, I'm sure. They've had children. And I just I always want to check in on Sam because he was in such a bad place when I introduced him in the book that I'm always kind of just like, I wonder how he is. He's real to me. He's so real to me that he still hangs out with me. In fact, he's in several of the Hunted series books. He reoccurs, and the whole family does. And I do that a lot in all of my books where the characters reoccur. But Sam also shows up in At Wolf Ranch in the Montana Men series because he's an FBI agent. So every once in a while I think to myself, well, maybe we could pull Sam in and see what he's up to.
I love how you're looking for ways to incorporate him.
That's how much he's kind of stuck with me. And then for the Wild Rose series, the third book, the Tough Talking Cowboy, which is Drake's book. I've turned in so many books to my editor and my agent, and they both read for me. And they always come back with here's what we love about the book, and here's what we want to change this up. This book, they both came back and were like, we could not put this book down. The pacing is so good. They raved about it, and I was just like, if I can make these two who have read, however many hundreds or thousands of books that they've read, and especially my editor who's edited so many books over her career, for them to do that, I was so proud of the book because Drake is military, so that's
Yeah.
important to me. And the story that I wanted to tell, I like really was mindful about the way I did everything. And I was just like, if this comes off, it's just, to me, it felt perfect and like great.
Yeah.
And I just was just like, I don't care if nobody else likes this book. Like, I love this book. You
That must
know?
have been so encouraging though to have these people whose opinions you trust and to come back at you and give you this great feedback. I mean, Cloud 9, could you even find
Cloud
it?
9, I like couldn't believe it. And not only that, but as a writer too,
Yes.
so much of what you do alone, right? And for I write books in about 3 to 4 months time period. So for those months of me like diving into these books, I'm alone with these characters and I love them and I want them to shine on the page for the reader. And then you turn it in and you're hoping like, I hope they love it too, kind of. You're always like, it's like handing over a child and being like, isn't it cute? Isn't she pretty? And you're just like waiting for them to be like, yes. I have great editors. I mean, they're never like, hurtful about what they want to change about the book. They always tell me like, this comes off a certain way. Because sometimes you're writing and your intention is one thing, that you want to say something, but then it doesn't like come off on the page, or I haven't actually put enough of the words on the page to convey it well enough. And that's what they're there to do, is to help me, make sure that what I really want to say, the heart of what I want to say, is there for the reader to then, take away from it. But yeah, Drake and Adria's story is like, I mean, I love all the books for different reasons, and like maybe the storylines for different reasons and stuff. And like I said, I try like when I'm writing not to like repeat myself or do the same thing, and always have something special in each of the books.
So I got 2 people sending in questions for you.
Okay.
So I don't want to mispronounce this. Madeleine Albers asked, how do you avoid stereotypes? But I think you kind of just touched on that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think in some of the books there is definitely some stereotyping, and I think that the reason I might use stereotype is on purpose, because stereotypes are stereotype for a reason, right? Like everybody knows, the girl who's like obsessed with like selfies and like, looking in the mirror or something like that. Or the hot cowboy who like walks into a bar and picks up whatever random chick he wants, right? Like the playboy, right? Those are stereotypes for a reason, because there are people who are like that. So I use that to my advantage. So like we were talking a little bit earlier about the playboy cowboy kind of thing, where I have done that a couple of times. But it's like, is that really who that person is, right? And is that person happy being that kind of stereotype? Like, what is behind that?
Yeah.
Why do they have that kind of public persona, and what do they really feel in their heart? And I think that's where like the redemption comes in for the hot playboy cowboy who finds the girl of his dreams, who's like, yeah, I'm not having this. That's the thing about stereotypes, though, is that you can use them to show that you can't take people at face value all the time. Lots of things happen behind closed doors that people don't know about, and that's the thing I think in the books I try to show, is like, you might perceive him as one way, but then when you're in his point of view and you're hearing what he's really thinking and what he's going through and how he's experienced the event, it may not be what he's really showing on the outside. And same for one of the heroines in the books. So I think you can use it to show, and maybe to help some people like look at other people in their life and go, maybe that person isn't really that happy, or maybe they're hiding something. Maybe they've seen hints of something that could be, abusive in their life, or maybe self-destructive in their life, and they're like hiding it behind a stereotypical facade.
I also can, in the way you're describing this, there's also the dimensional element, because if they're trying to project a stereotype or embracing a stereotype, and then you go underneath, you've already got your three-dimensional character right there.
Yeah, it really does help, like, show that people are,
So this is my favorite question of all time.
Okay.
Marcia A., I don't know when to pronounce this, Josana, how could you write such an amazing story? When you start talking about these characters, I'm like, thank you for an amazing story.
How do I write amazing stories? Well,
I love it.
They don't seem so amazing when I start them.
I think you would write amazing stories, so I'm right there with her. Because they're so character emotion driven. I feel like you've already kind of answered the question.
I think also as a writer, and just as a person in my own life, I feel like I'm somebody who's kind of empathetic. I'm always like, I'm also a mother, so I'm always like, you know, how's everybody doing? Is everybody okay? You know, taking care of people. I'm very nurturing in my own life. And I think that helps to like build characters. I read a lot of bad guys and a lot of people who do bad things. I grew up with an alcoholic father and in a kind of unstable home life, and so I get that as well. And then like, you know, in my own life, having to overcome that and create a family that's, you know, healthy and happy and balanced, so that, you know, my kids have a different experience than what I had. So I think part of being a writer is being thoughtful about those things. And so that's why when I'm writing, there's, you know, questions I ask myself, like, you know, why did they choose to do that? What's behind that? What's the motivation? Whether it's the hero, the heroine, or the villain of the story, like, why would they do something like that? Because villains even aren't all bad, right? Bad people do bad things because maybe bad things happen to them, and we maybe only see them as bad people, but it's like maybe when you find out that's what's happened to them, you can have a little sympathy for them as a human, but not for what they've done. Kind of a thing, right?
Well, what's the quote? It's the villain doesn't view themselves as a villain. The villain thinks he's the hero of his own story.
Exactly, right. Yeah. Because, you know, a lot of villains, and I even write them that way, and I've written their points of view in different books. And I like to show people, like, this is what this person is thinking. They're doing something bad, but in their mind, they're doing it for the right reasons, or they're doing it because they believe in this. And if you believe in something, you can hurt other people without, you know, maybe intentionally or unintentionally. And I've even had, like, a hero, usually it's a hero, who makes that mistake, where they believe in something or they do something thinking they're doing the right thing, but they've harmed somebody. And so, you know, the villain does have the opportunity for redemption. He just usually doesn't take it. But the hero, when presented with redemption, you know, will take the opportunity because they're the hero. And that's, you know, that's what you want a normal person to do, right? Is to see that they've done wrong and then redeem themselves, say I'm sorry, or, you know, do something to make up for it, and that. And so I think when I'm like writing my stories, I'm always thinking about that for each of the characters, and even the villain. Like, I kind of love writing villains because they're so bad, but they believe in what they do, and I can kind of like, I don't know, get into that headspace sometimes. And other times if it's a truly really dastardly villain, I'm like, I just have to set you aside for a little while. Like, I can't do this anymore. And I write some like really intense, you know, suspense plots sometimes, and so trying to do that is a lot of asking yourself, like, why would somebody do that?
I'm fascinated by this because in a way it's so funny because you are the vessel for your story and they can't surprise you, but you are thinking, oh, what's your motivation? You know, the way actors like, what's my motivation in this scene?
Yeah, and I'm not really asking like, what's my motivation? It's more of like, you know, it's the why of things. I think that for everything in life, that's the one question. I mean, like little kids from the time they're born, that's like the question they ask, right? That's like the main thing of life. Like, why? Why is that bright? Why is it dark? Why, you know, why is candy sweet? You know, because it's amazing. But why is like one of those things from the very youngest age that you ask about things, like why, you know? And I think when, as a writer, you know, especially in the editing process too, I'll like make sure, like, is the why there? So people understand the character of the why of it.
I was gonna say, I feel like I totally went off book because you're just so much fun to talk to. And like,
well, that's the thing as a writer, you love talking about books and writing and like, you know.
Thank you for watching my interview with Jennifer Ryan.